I hid my identity as the sole heiress to the Kingswell Group, one of the most powerful Wall Street empires, and spent 5 years living in a cramped apartment with Carter Miller, helping him build his tech startup from scratch. Finally, our company, Atlas was about to go public on Nasdaq. But at the IPO celebration party, he went down on one knee and proposed to Tiffany Vance, the daughter of a wealthy real estate developer. After the proposal, he dragged me into a quiet corner and handed me a non-disclosure agreement. Tiffany is bringing $100 million in Series C funding to Atlas, Carter said, his eyes cold and transactional. What do you have to offer, Stella? You're just an orphan. Sign this. I'll buy you a luxury condo in downtown Manhattan and give you $100,000 a month. Just stay in the shadows and be my good girl. I looked at his arrogant, smug face and burst out laughing. Carter, did you forget? I wrote every single line of the core AI algorithm that made this company worth billions. He thought I was just a nobody with no background. He had no idea that with one single phone call, the tech empire he was so proud of would crumble into dust. On the stage, Carter raised his champagne glass. The spotlight hit him perfectly, making him look like the king of the world. Tonight is not just the 5th anniversary celebration of Atlas, Carter announced into the microphone, his voice dripping with confidence. It is also the most important day of my life. He looked down at the VIP section with deep, calculated affection. Tiffany, will you marry me? The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Wearing a custom Dior gown, Tiffany walked up to the stage like a proud princess, lifting her skirt. Carter dropped to one knee, pulled out a massive Harry Winston diamond ring, and slipped it onto her finger. I stood in the dark corner of the hall, holding a glass of warm water I had poured for him because his stomach had been acting up earlier. A sharp, stabbing pain hit my stomach. 5 years ago, Carter was just a broke college kid who couldn't even pay his rent. I hid my identity as the Kingswell Group heiress and squeezed into a damp, freezing basement with him. We had no heating in the winter. My fingers got frostbitten, but I still kept typing on my keyboard to write the very first code for Atlas. Back then, he held my hands and said, Stella, when the company goes public, I will give you the grandest wedding in New York. Now the company was going public. But the bride wasn't me. At the back exit of the ballroom, Carter blocked me in the hallway. He handed me a folder. Stella, you're a smart girl. You should understand my situation, he said smoothly. The Vance family can bring $100 million to Atlas. That's our ticket to securing our Nasdaq listing. You're just an orphan who had to work 3 part-time jobs just to pay for college. You can't help me scale this company. I looked at the voluntary settlement and non-disclosure agreement in my hands and laughed from sheer anger. So you're throwing me away like trash? Carter frowned, clearly annoyed by my attitude. Don't put it so harshly. The agreement states that the apartment in Tribeca is yours, and I'll wire $100,000 to your bank account every month. As long as you play nice and don't make a scene in front of Tiffany, nothing will change between us, except for the marriage license. I raised my hand and slapped him across the face. Smack. Carter, you disgust me. Carter's head snapped to the side. His expression instantly darkened. Stella, don't push your luck, he hissed, grabbing my wrist. Without me, you'd still be working retail in some sketchy neighborhood. $100,000 a month? You couldn't make that money even if you sold your soul. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. Did you forget, Carter? The core AI algorithm of Atlas was written by me, and me alone. I reached into my collar and pulled out a cheap plastic hair clip hanging from a string around my neck. That was a $5 gift he bought me during our first year of starting the company. You told me this clip was our promise. You said you'd replace it with a real crown one day. Carter let out a cruel laugh. He snatched the clip from my neck, threw it onto the marble floor, and crushed it under his shiny leather shoe. Cheap trash. It looks pathetic. Wake up and face reality, Stella. Your code is valuable, but Tiffany's $100 million can buy me into high society. Tomorrow, hand over the master access codes of the core algorithm to the tech department. Otherwise, you won't get a single penny. I stared at him coldly. And if I refuse? Carter snapped his fingers. 4 massive, burly security guards stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. Take Miss Kingswell to the basement archive room so she can cool down. Nobody opens that door without my permission. Carter, this is kidnapping. You won't get away with this. I shouted, but the guards didn't give me a chance to fight back. They grabbed my arms and dragged me down to the basement. I'm doing this for your own good, Stella. Once the opening bell rings next week, I'll let you out, Carter said, adjusting his Tom Ford tie as he turned back toward the bright, glamorous ballroom. When you're ready to talk, write down the password. The heavy steel door of the basement archive room slammed shut. Clang. Total silence. There were no windows, no cell service, only a dim motion sensor light overhead. The AC was blasting, making the room feel like an icebox. I was thrown onto the cold concrete floor. The pain in my stomach suddenly intensified, crawling down to my lower abdomen. A sharp, throbbing cramp made me gasp. I curled up in the corner, clutching my stomach as cold sweat soaked my back. With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and touched the folded ultrasound report. I had just gotten it from the hospital this afternoon. I was 6 weeks pregnant. I had planned to tell him the good news at the celebration party tonight. What a pathetic joke. Baby, you chose the worst time to come, I whispered, tears finally streaming down my cheeks. The next morning, the steel door groaned open. Carter walked in, holding a glass of warm milk. Have you thought it through? He looked down at me, his eyes completely devoid of warmth. I held onto the metal shelving and forced myself to stand up. Carter, I'm pregnant. Carter froze for a second, then his brows knitted tightly together. Stella, are you seriously making up a lie like this just to keep the password? I crumpled the ultrasound report and threw it at his face. See for yourself. Carter caught the paper. As he read the medical stamp, his expression shifted. But there was no joy in his eyes. Only panic and irritation. Get rid of it, he said coldly. I stared at him in disbelief. What did you say? I said, get an abortion. Carter raised his voice, his face twisting. Tiffany hates kids. If she finds out you're pregnant, the Vance family will pull their funding immediately. Stella, do not ruin my life right now. My body was shaking violently. I pointed at the open door. Get out. Get the hell out of here. Carter sneered. If you don't hand over the password, you can rot in this room. He turned and walked out, locking the steel door behind him. I collapsed onto the floor, swallowed by a wave of absolute despair. This was the man I had loved for 5 years. For money and status, he didn't hesitate for a second to kill his own child. I lost track of time. The steel door opened again. The bright light blinded me temporarily, and I shielded my eyes. The sharp click of high heels echoed in the empty room. Tiffany Vance walked in, wearing a Chanel tweed suit. She pinched her nose, looking at me with pure disgust. 2 muscular bodyguards followed closely behind her. Oh, so this is the pathetic rat who's been begging Carter for scraps. Tiffany walked up to me and kicked my leg with the toe of her designer heel. You look so cheap. I have no idea how Carter tolerated you for 5 years. Ich lernte her. What are you doing here? Tiffany giggled, pulled a document from her Hermes Birkin bag, and threw it in my face. Just checking on the loser. And helping you take care of the mistake in your stomach. I looked down at the paper. It was an authorization for termination of pregnancy. At the bottom right corner, Carter's signature was written in bold, familiar cursive. No, he wouldn't. My head spun, and my blood ran ice cold. Why wouldn't he? Tiffany knelt down, grabbing my chin tightly. Her long acrylic nails dug into my skin. Carter said, as long as it makes me happy. You and your bastard child are nothing but trash. My family has a reputation to protect. We can't have a lowlife woman giving birth to my fiancé's child. She stood up and wiped her hands with a wet tissue, looking disgusted. Do it. Carter said, as long as she has enough breath to write down the password, she doesn't need anything else. The 2 bodyguards immediately pounced on me like wolves. Get off of me. This is assault. I screamed, kicking and scratching with everything I had. But I hadn't eaten in days. I was no match for 2 grown men. One guard pinned my shoulders to the ground, while the other raised his heavy boot and stomped hard on my abdomen. An agonizing pain ripped through my body. I screamed, curling up into a tight ball. Keep going until she miscarries, Tiffany ordered coldly from the side. Another heavy kick landed on my stomach. Something warm and wet started flowing down my thighs, quickly soaking through my pants and pooling onto the concrete floor in a gruesome crimson stain. My baby, help. I weakly stretched out my hand, trying to grab onto anything. Tiffany walked over and stepped on my hand, grinding her heel into my knuckles. Scream all you want. Nobody is coming to save you. Remember this pain, Stella. Know your place, and don't try to climb into a world you don't belong in. She laughed, turning on her heel and leaving with her guards. The steel door slammed shut again. I lay in a pool of my own blood, my consciousness fading. My life was draining away. With the last bit of my strength, I reached into the hidden lining of my bra and pressed a tiny panic button. It was the exclusive GPS tracker for the sole heir of the Kingswell Group. Beep. A faint blue light flickered once. I closed my eyes, a single tear of blood slipping down my cheek. Carter. Tiffany. You will pay for this with your lives. The faint, blinking blue light of the GPS tracker was the only active thing left. In the pitch-black cold of the basement archive room, under the streets of Manhattan, the silence was absolute. My breathing was shallow, my fingers resting limp in the sticky, cooling pool of dark crimson that had stained the concrete floor. The pain in my lower abdomen had faded into a dull, freezing numbness, the unmistakable weight of a life that had been torn from my body before it ever had a chance to breathe. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, baby. I whispered in my mind, my throat raw. I was too weak. I let them hurt you. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. Above the ceiling, the distant, muffled sound of heavy shouting and the rapid thud-thud-thud of military-grade helicopter blades began to rattle the metal shelves of the archive. A second later, the massive steel doors of the basement did not just creak open, they were blown completely off their hinges. Boom. The heavy iron door flew across the room, smashing into the filing cabinets with a force that sent a shower of paper and dust into the air. Through the smoke, 12 men in dark, tactical gear with the gold insignia of the Vance Group's private security detail rushed in, their weapons raised, their laser sights cutting through the dark like red needles. At the front of the squad was a tall, gray-haired man in a bespoke charcoal trench coat. It was my father's personal chief of security, Commander Vance. He looked at my limp body lying in the corner of the room, my skin translucent, my dress soaked in blood, and a terrifying, bloodshot rage instantly exploded in his eyes. Stella. He fell to his knees beside me, his hands trembling as he checked my pulse. Didn't use the gentle, cautious touch of a corporate employee. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it tightly around my shivering shoulders, his voice raw. Secure the building. Commander Vance roared into his radio, his jaw clenching so hard the muscles in his cheek leaped. Nobody leaves. The CEO, Carter Miller, and the Vance girl. Detain them. If they resist, use lethal force. Yes, sir. He scooped me into his arms, my head slumping against his chest. As he carried me out of the smoky basement into the bright, flashing red lights of the ambulance fleet parked outside, the entire street had been locked down by 30 black SUVs bearing the Kingswell Group's seal. The orphan Stella was gone, and the sole heiress to the Kingswell empire was finally going home. The master suite of the Presbyterian private hospital was quiet, the smell of fresh lavender and sea salt from the humidifier completely washing away the copper scent of the basement. I lay on the white bed, my left hand resting over my flat stomach. The physical pain had subsided, replaced by a cold, permanent vacancy. Beside my bed, my father, Harrison Kingswell, sat in the leather chair, his face pale, his dark gray eyes surrounded by deep, bloodshot lines of exhaustion. He had spent 72 hours awake, his fingers clenching the armrests of his chair so tightly the leather had torn. Stella, he whispered, his voice thick with a deep, maternal-like grief. The doctors, they stabilized your blood pressure. But the baby, I'm sorry, my sweet girl. I was too late. I looked at the silver ceiling of the ward, my face entirely expressionless. It wasn't your fault, father, I said, my voice sounding like dry paper rubbing together. It was mine. I wanted to prove to myself that he loved me for who I was, not for my money. I wanted a mutual redemption. I slowly turned my head to look at him. Now I want to redeem his debt. Harrison's eyes turned completely black, the same cold, predatory gaze that had allowed him to build the Kingswell Group into a multi-billion-dollar Wall Street empire. The Atlas Tech IPO is scheduled for tomorrow morning on Nasdaq, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low lethal register. Carter has already invited the city's media. He's booked the grand ballroom at the plaza for the celebration party. Let him ring the bell, I said, a thin, sharp smile touching my lips. I want him to stand at the very top of his mountain before I push him off. The morning of the Nasdaq listing was a glittering, high-profile affair. The Nasdaq studio in Times Square was filled with hundreds of guests, the massive external screens displaying Carter's handsome face and the Atlas Tech logo in high definition. Carter stood at the center of the stage, wearing his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his hand wrapped tightly around Tiffany's waist. Tiffany was wearing a magnificent, pearl-encrusted gown, her hand displaying the massive Harry Winston diamond ring that caught the flashing lights of the cameras. We are 10 seconds away from the opening bell, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Joya Era is officially going public. Carter looked at the camera, a smug, triumphant smile touching his lips. He was the king of the world. He had the tech, he had the funding, and he had the wealthy heiress by his side. He raised his hand, his fingers touching the brass bell. 3 to 1. Before his hand could press the bell, the massive digital screens behind him suddenly froze. The green stock ticker symbols disappeared, replaced by a single, bold black seal, the gold lion of the Kingswell Legal Group. The alarm system of the studio began to hum with a low, mechanical warning. What is happening? Carter's smile faltered, his hand hovering over the bell in confusion. Is there a system delay? The double doors of the studio were pushed open. 12 lawyers in dark gray suits walked in, led by my father's chief legal counsel, Mr. Sterling. Behind them were 6 federal marshals and 4 officers from the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Carter Miller, Mr. Sterling said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. We are here to serve you with a federal injunction. The Nasdaq listing for Atlas Tech has been officially suspended pending a criminal investigation into systematic patent theft and intellectual property fraud. What? Carter gasped, taking a step back, his face turning a pasty yellow shade of gray. That's impossible. I own the patents. My team wrote the core AI algorithm of Atlas Tech was registered under the Kingswell Group's shell company, Orenburg Tech, for years ago, Mr. Sterling said, sliding a document across the stage. The author of the code is listed as Stella Kingswell. You have been utilizing her proprietary software without a license, falsifying corporate assets to secure your Series C funding. The crowd of noble guests and investors let out a loud, unified shriek of horror. Tiffany's father, Mr. Vance, stood up from the front row, his face purple with rage. Carter, what is the meaning of this? You told me the code was entirely yours. It was. Carter screamed, his eyes rolling in panic. Stella was just my employee. She's an orphan. She has no connection to the Kingswell Group. Stella Kingswell is the sole heir to the Kingswell Group, Mr. Miller, Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a freezing register. And your Series C funding? The Vance Real Estate Group has just been declared insolvent. The second part of the hammer was dropped on the Vance family within 10 minutes. While Carter was being detained by the SEC officers in the studio, the federal marshals marched into the Vance Real Estate headquarters. They had a warrant for the arrest of Mr. Vance. The Kingswell Group had spent the last 24 hours short-selling the Vance corporate stock, exposing 30 years of systematic tax evasion, bribery, and illegal money laundering. The banks, seeing the Kingswell Group's massive short squeeze, had immediately called in all of the Vance family's outstanding loans. The $100 million Tiffany had promised to bring to Atlas Tech was frozen in an escrow account, seized by the federal government. No, please, Tiffany wept, her pearls clattering to the floor as she fell to her knees on the stage of the studio, her white dress looking rumpled and dirty. Joy. Carter, do something. Call your partners. Call the bank. But Carter didn't reach out to grab her hand. He stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the massive LED screen on the wall. The screen had switched from the legal document to a live video feed from the Presbyterian Hospital. I was sitting in the leather armchair by the window, wearing a simple, elegant black silk dress, my fingers holding a warm cup of tea. Beside me stood my father, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. Stella. Carter whispered, his voice raw, his lips trembling as he stared at the screen. You're a Kingswell. The apartment in Tribeca has been repossessed, Carter. My voice came through the screen, quiet, cool, and entirely dead. And the $100,000 a month you promised? I think you'll need it to pay for your defense attorney. But from what my lawyer tells me, no firm in New York will take your case. The video went black. The winter rain of New York was cold, turning the asphalt of Wall Street into a dark, shimmering mirror under the yellow street lamps. I was leaving the Kingswell Plaza building at 6 p.m., my trench coat pulled tight around my neck, my black umbrella held steady against the wind, when a figure stood in my path. It was Carter. He looked like a ghost. He was wearing a cheap, wet coat, his hair plastering against his forehead, his face pale and sunken, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Had been released on a minor bail paid by his mother's pension, but his company, his wealth, and his status were gone. He stood in front of my car door, his body shaking with the cold. Stella, he whispered, his voice raw, broken, and completely stripped of his pride. Please just let me talk to you. Just for 5 minutes. I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Miller, I said, my hand reaching for the door handle of my Rolls-Royce. Move aside. I'm going home. No. He fell to his knees on the rain-slicked pavement, his hands reaching out to grab the hem of my coat, his forehead pressing against my leather boots. Please, Stella. Just look at this. I found it. I glued it back together. He pulled a broken, dirty piece of blue plastic from his pocket, the cheap hair clip he had crushed under his shoe. Our promise. The promise we made in the basement. I still have it, Stella. I'll go back to the basement with you. I'll write the code with you. Just don't look at me like a stranger. I looked down at the man kneeling in the mud at my feet, his hands clutching my shoes like a beggar waiting for scraps. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, and no pain. The girl who loved you when she was 22 died in that basement archive room, Carter, I said, my voice quiet and cool over the sound of the rain. You killed her. You let your guards stomp on her stomach, and you signed the papers to destroy her child. I pulled my hand back, climbed into the car, and locked the door. The security guards pushed him aside, his body falling into the wet gravel of the driveway as the car pulled away. The spring in New York arrived with a brilliant, golden clarity. The central headquarters of the Kingswell Group was a massive, 70-story glass skyscraper that overlooked the harbor. My new office on the top floor was warm, smelling of fresh pine, coffee, and success. I stood by the window, a warm cup of tea in my hands, watching the yellow butterflies dance over the flowers under the sun. My hands were strong, my posture relaxed, and my chest was light, free of the suffocating pressure of my past life. Stella, my father's secretary, called out from the living room, his voice warm and professional. The final transition files for the new logistics line have been approved. We're launching the first shipping line at noon. Coming, darling, I smiled, setting my cup down. I walked down the hallway, my heels making a sharp, steady, and confident sound against the polished wooden floor. I looked up at the warm, blue sky of my homeland, took a deep, clean breath, and walked into the warm light of my future. I was finally, truly free,